Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by Linode and Luna Display. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Vitici. Hi, Federico.
Hello, John Voorhees. How are you?
I'm doing very well, thank you. You know, I've been thinking about photography a lot lately, and I want to just dive right into this with you because I used to take a lot more pictures than I do now, and I think that was because I was commuting every day into the city. And so I had all these opportunities. I had this, mile-long walk down to the train, and I was walking around the city all the time. And I always had opportunities to take pictures. And that changed a little bit once I started working from home. And it's like, well,
I'm sorry.
it is all your fault. I'm sitting here at a desk most of the day in my house, and it just doesn't make for compelling photography most days. And so it's what I've been trying to do lately, though, is get back into it by just carving out some time to go for a walk or do whatever it is and take a little more time and take some more pictures. And I thought we ought to talk about photography apps a little bit because this is like one of the deepest veins of apps on the App Store, I think. I mean, there are so many different kinds of photography apps, and we're not gonna cover even 1% of them today. We're gonna do all sorts of apps at some point, I think. But today we're going to just cover a couple. What do you think about photography? Have you been doing more of that lately yourself?
Yes, this has been on my mind a lot, especially since I got the new iPad Pro and the new Mac Mini with the 4K display. I've always been intrigued by learning the art of photography and the idea of being able to control in the editing stage more of the individual aspects that make up a good photo. Especially since we got 2 dogs last year, being able to capture those memories, but also to create beautiful pictures instead of just having a large quantity of pictures. With the when they were puppies and growing up, we have tons of pictures. But also, I want to be able to have great pictures and to have beautiful pictures that I can post and I can share and I can send to my friends. And since I got the new iPad Pro, it's so powerful, and the ability to connect it to an external display and to edit photos and see your canvas on the display, it makes for a really nice workflow. But that doesn't change the problem that I need to learn what I'm doing, and that I need to learn the differences in between shooting with the Apple Camera app and shooting RAW.
Right.
Shooting RAW on iOS has been possible for at least the past couple of years. It was introduced a few generations ago of iOS. But this is not a mode of the Apple Camera app. It's an API that developers can build third-party apps for. And we covered a bunch of RAW-enabled camera apps on Mac Stories in the past. We're going to cover a couple today as well. But the idea of, and again, I'm super simplifying here, there's tons of explanations and tutorials that you can find on Google. But the idea of shooting RAW is that you end up with this large file that contains more information about the picture that you took. And the beauty of RAW is that it allows you to have a broader range of modifications that you can apply to a photo, because you can tweak the individual values. You can tweak individual aspects like highlights and shadows and contrast and grain and all of that stuff without producing weird artifacts that you would produce by applying the same edits to a JPEG file, because the JPEG file has already been processed, has already been compressed by iOS, and it strips out all that extra metadata, all that extra layers of data that you can otherwise modify in a RAW file. Do you think that that's a good summary, John?
Yeah, I think it is, and I think one of the issues that sometimes makes it hard to get into photography, whether it's on iOS, a Mac, or wherever, is that there's an awful lot of terminology and jargon it's terminology that comes from a time of film cameras, and it's been translated into how things work in the digital age. And so there's a lot of terminology to kind of get through. But the nice thing about the way iOS works is I feel like there's a nice progression from starting out just using the Apple Camera app and the Photos app and doing some tweaks to your photos in Photos, whether it's, the automatic enhance magic wand button that's in there, or going in and adjusting a few of the sliders to deal with the tint, or the highlights or the lighting or whatever, or add filters, all the way up to shooting manually with third-party camera apps, as well as doing more complex editing in dedicated editing apps. And that's I think the progression that we'd like to kind of start talking about and giving people an idea of how they can do a little bit more of this themselves. Because one of the things that I think sometimes turns people off about photography is that there is all this stuff to learn, and sometimes it just feels overwhelming and too much. And what I try to do when I'm taking pictures is, sometimes just taking a picture with the camera app and giving it a couple of quick tweaks, or the auto enhance in the Photos app, is totally fine. It's enough. And you post it on Instagram or send it to a friend or whatever you do. That's totally fine. But what I like about some of the apps we're going to talk about today is that whether using that camera app or another camera app, you can pull out the handful of ones that you find to be the best and use a dedicated editing tool to make it even better. And then you've got these great memories. You can put them in a special place, maybe make prints or whatever you do with them, share them with your friends. And it's pretty rewarding once you kind of figure out what works best for you in terms of the process, from taking the picture all the way through to having something that you're happy to share with other people.
Yeah, I agree. There's there's tons of apps that expose all of these controls, and with sliders and with text labels, and you need to know what you're doing, because otherwise, all of these controls don't make any sense. And so my pick for shooting RAW on iOS is an app that really tries to take that complexity away from you as much as possible. And the app is Halide. It's created by Sebastian DeWitt and Ben Sandowski. It's been available on iOS, I think, for the past couple of years. And what I really like about this app is that it does enable advanced controls when shooting on your iPhone if you want to capture raw images. But it doesn't overwhelm you with text labels or sliders on the screen, or just clutter that I see in different apps that like pro camera apps for pro photographers. This is not it. This is an app with an elegant design in the viewfinder and with a customizable row of additional controls that are really easy to understand. So, for example, in the viewfinder of Halide, you will see this bar sitting above the bottom panel where the shutter button is, or the autofocus slider is. There's this extra bar on top of it that has a little triangular indicator. That means you can expand the bar to reveal more controls. And when you reveal more controls, there's a settings icon that you can tap to see all of the different icons that you can add to the main UI. This is called the quick bar, which can be customized by the user. And what I like is that you can, for example, I dragged in the raw indicator, which is a button that you tap, and when it's yellow, when it's selected, it means you're shooting raw. When it's off, you're not. You can turn on a grid. And for example, one of the things that I like about the grid is that it, unlike the Apple grid that you can enable in settings for the camera, this one, when your device is aligned, when it's not like tilted at an angle, you get a bit of a haptic feedback, and the center of the grid briefly flashes in yellow. And this works both when you're holding your iPhone in portrait or when you're holding it in landscape and, like, I don't know, you're trying to take a picture of your Instagram food, for example.
Right.
You're gonna get like a little haptic feedback when the iPhone is aligned with the horizontal surface below it. It's really well done. You can swipe on the screen to change exposure, or you can swipe horizontally to change exposure. You can swipe vertically to change exposure. You can swipe horizontally for ISO. And there's just so many other little details that I appreciate, like the way that you transition in and out of autofocus and manual focus. It's really well done. There's a slider that you can interact with. Otherwise, you can pull back the slider and it jumps back into automatic focus mode. Again, there's tons of haptic feedback happening throughout the entire UI, which really helps because it feels like you're holding a physical camera, but it's a digital version of a camera on your iPhone. And something else that I really like, actually two things. First one is the ability to capture depth photography using Halide. And when you do that, you can see in real time the part of the subject that is going to be in focus and which part isn't. And you can even enable like a real-time depth map that shows you through different colors what parts of the image the true depth camera on the iPhone sees as in the forefront, and which one's in the background, in the foreground, sorry, and which one's in the background. Again, really well done, really intuitive, and it uses all system APIs, all native camera APIs on iOS. And the second feature that I like is the smart HDR that the developers of Halide have implemented with iOS 12 and the latest generation of iPhone XS and XR. They were able to create their own smart HDR for RAW photography. Essentially, it means that they're doing something that Apple is not when shooting RAW. They're doing balancing of colors, of highlights, of shadows, of contrast, to give you a better initial raw image than what would otherwise come out of the straight camera API, the capturing API on iOS. I'm probably getting some of the terminology wrong here. And again, I think that's expected because as someone who's just getting started with photography, getting all the terminology, all the names of all these controls and all these parameters right is very difficult. But again, something that I really want to try. And so I've been using Halide. When I go to the dog park, for example, instead of taking pictures with the Apple camera, because I have plenty of those, lately I've been taking fewer pictures of my dogs or the, plants or flowers at the park, but with Halide. So I'm trying to think more about the subject and the framing and the trying to capture an exact moment instead of just holding the iPhone and capturing anything. I'm trying to be more disciplined and more in a mood for taking a single good picture rather than 20 or 30 different random pictures. Because later when back at home, I wanna go through my pictures and I wanna edit them and I wanna save them, which we're gonna talk about in a few minutes. But the idea is, at least for me, as someone who's just getting started, I feel like Halide makes it easier than other solutions I've found on the App Store. Now, it's totally possible that if you're already an advanced photographer, you need those more pro solutions with tons of sliders, with tons of labels and controls and icons on screen. But for someone like me who just I want to shoot raw, I don't really know what I'm doing, but I want to learn, I feel like Halide is an excellent way to get started.
Yeah, I think that deliberate approach that you're talking about makes a lot of sense. I mean, one of the things, though, that I feel like did more to make me a better photographer than anything else when I started out was taking lots of pictures, just because it really gives you a better sense, deliberate pictures, but lots of pictures, because it gives you a better sense of framing and composition and all that kind of thing. And so I did a lot of that early on. And one of the issues that I described at the outset of the show is that now I'm not just taking all that many because I don't have the opportunity, the easy opportunity that I used to have, and I have to create that opportunity. This episode of App Stories is brought to you by Linode. With Linode, you'll have access to a suite of powerful hosting options with prices starting at just $5 per month. And you'll be up and running with your own virtual server in the Linode cloud in under a minute. Linode features industry-leading performance with native SSD storage, a 40 gigabit network, and Intel E5 processors. Linode now has 10 data centers spread across the world, meaning you can serve your customers even quicker than before. Linode also has an API that allows you to easily automate tasks and develop custom applications in the cloud. And of course, everything is manageable via the command line. All of the Linode pricing tiers feature hourly billing with a monthly cap on all plans and add-on services like backups and node balancers. So, what can you use Linode for? The answer is a ton of different things. You can host a large database, run a mail server, operate a VPN, run Docker containers, host private Git servers. The list just keeps going on and on. Also, Linode is hiring right now. If this interests you, go to linode.com/careers to learn more. All right, so Linode has fantastic pricing options available too. Their plans start at 1 gigabyte of RAM for just $5 a month, and they offer high memory plans starting at 16 gigabytes of RAM. As a listener of this show, you can sign up at linode.com/appstories, and you'll not only be supporting the show, but you'll also get $20 towards any Linode plan. On the 1 gigabyte of RAM plan, that's 4 free months. And with a 7-day money-back guarantee, there's absolutely nothing to lose. So go to linode.com/appstories right away to learn more, sign up, and take advantage of that $20 credit, or use the promo code AppStories2018 at checkout. Thanks so much to Linode for supporting the show. I want to mention another manual camera app that can shoot RAW, which is Obscura by Ben McCarthy. It's a really great app. What I like about it is that, as we talked about, there's a lot of terminology, a lot of complexity, a lot of things you can adjust with these manual cameras. But Obscura does a really neat thing in that it has, comparing it maybe a little bit to Halide, it's got a similar UI in that I think most of these camera apps have a viewfinder at the top, a shutter button at the bottom, and then some sort of array of adjustments that can be made surrounding that. And what Obscura does that I really like is it takes a cue from actual physical cameras as opposed to iPhones, and it uses a dial system. So when you look above the shutter, but below the viewfinder, you see an icon that's going to be centered right above your shutter, but next to it are other adjustments. And so you can kind of swipe across that, and you get haptic feedback as you do so. And each of those is another thing that can be adjusted. There's filters, there's settings for the camera, there's grids, white balance, there's a spirit level for doing that horizon that you talked about to make sure your camera is level and has haptic feedback just like Halide. There's a flash, there's timers and formats and all kinds of other things. So, and then if you tap into any of those, you've got another dial that has whatever the sub settings are for each of those categories. So that I like a lot. But what I like even more, I think, is that to the left and right of the shutter button are an exposure button and a focus button. So unlike Halide, where you're swiping on the actual view, you tap one of these buttons and another dial opens up that is just tick marks. It's a lot like the tick marks you would find on the edges of a dial on a physical DSLR camera. And as you swipe across, you get a great haptic feedback. So it feels like you're actually spinning a dial, and it adjusts the focus and the exposure as you go. There are other adjustments that can be done near just below the viewfinder. You can deal with things like ISO, which can be adjusted by using yet another dial. So it's all very dial based. And what Obscura also does is that if you're in the camera app and you've got the viewfinder up, if you just swipe straight down, it goes into your library. And from there, you can apply filters, share, copy, duplicate, do all sorts of, basic sharing and library management stuff. So I found it to be a really great app because it's for similar reasons that you described, in that it's not intimidating. It's easier to get into, and you can kind of go into one of those settings and just kind of take a peek at how it changes the viewfinder as you look at something at an image, because it's all live, and that way you can get a better sense for what you're doing as you're trying to shoot.
So the thing to understand about editing raw files, I think maybe this is even the biggest obstacle for someone who's just getting started and is still learning the terminology and still learning what different controls do. I feel like it's important to set a goal for yourself in terms of what you want to achieve in a picture. Because when you're taking normal pictures with the camera app on your phone or your iPad, you're just trusting the system to do whatever is best for you. So yes, you can enable HDR or you can choose between different modes, but ultimately you're telling the system, capture what I'm looking at and give me an image, a final product that I don't necessarily have to edit myself. But I feel like when you're shooting raw, you are taking a picture because you want to edit everything yourself and you want to make sure that you capture something specific and understanding your goal. What is it that you want to capture? Is it like, are you trying to exactly recreate what your eyes saw? Or are you trying to sort of capture what you remember, but trying to make it look for more dramatic, for instance? Or I don't know, are you going for a specific mood? For example, like today I took a picture of this very tall and very creepy looking tree. at the park, like this tree with no leaves because the winter is approaching. When the time comes to edit that picture, I want to go for this, like, I don't know, black and white sort of dramatic, sort of creepy mood if possible. So that's what I have in mind. Because I think if you don't set a goal for yourself, if you don't have like, I want this picture to be able to achieve this specific goal, I think it's easier, especially when you're not an expert, to get lost in this sea of sliders and controls and checkboxes and all these things that you can adjust. Because otherwise, you just, if you do that, you just end up stockpiling modifications on top of modifications, and suddenly you end up with this picture that does nothing of what you wanted and just looks like a mess.
Yes, and I think, when it comes to editing, this is probably true of editing all sorts of things, but less is more, right? I mean, if you just kind of start wildly sliding those sliders around, you're going to end up with something that it might be super bright and and seem kind of beautiful, but it's really not. It's kind of gaudy and not like real life. I mean, yes, there are times you want to go for a particular mood, but even that can be overdone, right? I mean, I think you're right. You have to, I think, try to have a goal in mind, and also be sparing with how much you're moving those sliders, and figure out which are the ones that get you that look, and just leave the rest alone.
Yeah, I've done all of that.
This episode of App Stories is brought to you by our friends at Luna Display. Have you ever looked at your iPad and wished you could use it as a second display for your Mac? Luna Display lets you do exactly that. And it makes total sense, right? Your iPad already has a gorgeous display, and you can always use some extra space when working on your Mac. Luna Display provides crystal clear image quality, reliable performance, and wireless flexibility. You just pop in a little piece of hardware into your Mac, and you're good to go. And if you don't have access to Wi-Fi, no worries, because you can connect via USB. When using Luna Display, you can set up your workspace wherever you want. You can be productive in your office or on the couch. You get more screen real estate without the expense of buying a second screen. Luna Display also acts as a complete extension of your Mac. It supports your external keyboard as well as the Apple Pencil and touch interactions, so you can interact with your Mac with a swipe of a finger. I love the Luna Display because it provides the freedom to get away from my desk. I may be working on something at my Mac already, but now I can move about my house and sit wherever I like, including outside where I've got a Wi-Fi router, so that I can work on my Mac from my iPad. Also, the Luna Display is amazingly portable. It's this little nubbin that plugs into the side of your Mac, either by USB-C or mini DisplayPort. Just run an app on your Mac and your iPad and connect the two, and you're all set. It feels like magic. Listeners of App Stories can get a 10% discount on Luna Display. Just go to lunadisplay.com and enter the promo code AppStories at checkout. Again, that's lunadisplay.com and App Stories at checkout. I'll put a link in the show notes. Our thanks to Luna Display for supporting the show.
So the app that I've been using to edit these pictures, so I've been using both Darkroom and Lightroom. And Lightroom, I want you to talk about it, John, because I think you're a little more familiar with it than I am. But Darkroom, which is coming soon to iPad, there's a beta that the developers have announced. And I've been playing with the beta, though I can't share too many details. But it shares a common foundation with the iPhone app, which has been around for a few years. And it's one of the best apps to edit raw photos on iOS. The main difference between Darkroom and Lightroom is that Darkroom integrates natively with the iOS photo library. So you don't create a dedicated library in Darkroom. You launch the app and you see your standard photos library with all the details that you can also see in Photos. So you can see your albums, you can see the photos that you've liked that have the little heart icon on them. And unlike the Photos app, however, you will also see which ones are JPEGs and which ones are RAW and which ones have depth in them, thanks to these icons that Darkroom puts on top of the thumbnails. So I actually believe this is a better view than the standard Apple view in the Photos app when browsing your photos. Like, if you want to see which photos are of which type, I feel like this is a very nice way to present them. So you can easily see which one is a favorite, which one is a raw file. And when you make a modification, again, you don't import a photo into like a separate library, into a separate thing. You just make those modifications, and when you go back to the main screen, you see a preview there in the thumbnail itself. And when you're done, you can choose to modify the original, or you can choose to export as a separate version. But the main goal of Darkroom is to simplify the management of photos by not forcing you to say, okay, took these 10 raw files and put them somewhere else. It just integrates very nicely with the built-in library on iOS. What I like about Darkroom is that it combines two approaches to making photos pretty, essentially. There's the filters and all the other edits that you can apply. And Darkroom ships with a very, very good collection of built-in filters, and anything from black and white to sort of, moody, sort of washed out colors, to duotone, and all those kinds of filters that you've probably seen on Instagram, but you have more choice in Darkroom. And what I like is that you can adjust the intensity of every filter, and you can also make your own. So you can make your own filter by saying take all these presets and save them into a filter, which is really nice. So you can choose between applying filters and sort of trusting the filter to change the highlights and the shadows and the contrast and the brightness to achieve that kind of style, or you can go in yourself manually and tweak all the saturation of a specific color, or the amount of grain, or you can tweak the sharpening of an image. So you can combine these two approaches together. And once you've done some edits in Darkroom, and you can open the history view, and you're going to see all of the changes that you made to a photo, and you can disable individual changes in your history view. It's like a log of all the edits that you performed, or you can even copy all of those edits and paste them onto another photo. So the idea would be, if you have a mix of edits that you like to apply consistently to multiple pictures, like use this filter and use this amount of color, this intensity of the color yellow, I don't know, something like that. But if you have like a preset of edits, you can copy and paste them from the history view. And a new feature that I really like is the ability to create groups of hashtags. I think they're called tag sets or something like that. So the idea is, if you're a serious Instagram user, if you're a pro Instagram user, you can create bundles of hashtags. So I created in Darkroom a bundle called dogs, and it contains the hashtags dogs and dogs of Instagram, which is a very fun hashtag on if you explore. Very pretty pictures, and also dog life, because that's funny. And when you share a photo for Darkroom, you can easily apply the hashtag set so that it's copied to your clipboard. So when you go into Instagram, you just need to paste, and all of your hashtags are already there without having to manually type them yourself. And you can even copy these sets of hashtags to the system clipboard via Siri, thanks to shortcuts, because Darkroom supports them in iOS 12. So overall, my take on Darkroom is that if you're looking to modify your raw files with filters, this is the way to go. And the filters are beautiful, and you have great freedom to customize them and make them your own. But also, it's a good app if you want to change the global values of a raw file without having to go down to the individual detail, which we're going to talk about in a minute with Lightroom, I think. In Darkroom, it's easy to say, for example, in this picture, I want the red to be a little more saturated, or I want the green color throughout the entire picture to be, a little less punchy, a little less aggressive. You can do that with Darkroom. And of course, there's the color curve, there's all of the other features that you might expect. You can choose your export format, your export quality. There's tons of frames that you can choose from if you want to frame your picture with specific formats, like having a white frame or a black frame around the picture. There's tons to choose from. My general impression is that Darkroom strikes a good balance of what you might expect from Instagram in terms of filters, what you might expect from the Apple Photos app when you want to tweak some values, but it's optimized for RAW, and it gives you a little more freedom than those two apps.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of describing it, because to me, Darkroom is really one of the best transition apps away from the most basic filters and other adjustments you can make in photos and something like Instagram, because it does that. It has those kinds of things, but it also takes it a little bit further, which is really a great place to start. It's a great app. I like it a lot myself. So I want to talk a little bit about Lightroom. It's interesting. I've spent years kind of trying to stay away from Adobe Creative Suite, mainly because I'm just doing this for fun for the most part, and it's more of a hobby. I didn't want to spend an inordinate amount of money on a monthly subscription for something that I wasn't going to use very often, or if it was just a hobby. But those subscriptions have, I think, been changed a little bit over time and are a little bit more approachable. They're still not cheap, but you can, for instance, get a subscription to Lightroom and the other photography style apps Adobe offers for $10 a month, which is a lot better option than it used to have. Now, Lightroom, so it does require a subscription of some sort to Creative Suite. And I've been using it recently, and I like it a lot because it kind of takes those photos that I think are the very best ones and the ones that I want to tweak a little bit and save and share and maybe make prints or whatever it is, and puts them somewhere else because it has its own separate library. It's not like Darkroom in that sense. You don't open it up and just automatically have all of your photos from your camera roll available. You can bring things in from there, but you can also bring things in from an SD card, say, that you connect with, yet another dongle. Mm-hmm. And then those photos live there and they sync up to the Creative Suite cloud service so that your images are saved in the cloud and available in other Adobe products, but are also kind of backed up there. So that's kind of nice. What I like most, I think, about Lightroom is a couple things. First of all, it's got even more fine-grained control over a lot of different aspects of the photos. For instance, I had a picture that I was editing the other day, which is a picture of the Sears Tower in Chicago. And it was straight up shot from like a half a block away. And you could kind of see another skyscraper encroaching in the corner just a little bit. And it was just a little distracting. They've got a clone and heal tool in Lightroom where it was super easy just to kind of edit that out so it doesn't exist anymore. You can't do that in Darkroom, for instance. And I really like to be able to do that. That tool is probably the hardest to figure out how to use on Lightroom, but most of the controls are super easy and intuitive. I was really surprised at how approachable this app has become because it really is, and it was originally more for pro photographers, but it is something that I think just really anybody can pick up and really enjoy. There's also all kinds of ways to slice and dice your photos, whether it's with filters, so you can see just certain photos that are tagged a certain way or are from a particular location or whatever the parameters happen to be. You can figure out exactly which photos you want in a particular view. And then you can do things like there's really quick swipe gestures for managing things. So you can swipe on the left side of the screen to set a certain number of stars, 1 to 5 stars. And you can flag by swiping up and down on the right side of the screen. Flag something for deletions, flag something for follow-up editing or whatever it is, which is a really fast way to go through a large collection of photos very, very quickly. There's one thing that I do and that I've used to try to learn how some of these sliders and things work a little better is there is an auto enhance feature here. There's also filters and other things, but if you tap that auto enhance, it automatically moves all those sliders. So you can hit that, look, see if you like what it did. And if you do, you can go through and see, oh, all right. So it moved, the brightness here, the white balance there, the tint here, highlights there, that sort of thing. And by doing that and kind of paying attention to what is changing, you can either tweak it to make it a little more to your liking, or you can also just learn how to do that yourself manually when you don't want to use the auto feature, which I think is kind of the best way to learn some of how these things work is to just kind of pay attention to what things like auto enhance is doing to a picture. All right, Federico. Well, I feel this is another one of those topics where we've just barely scratched the surface, and we'll revisit it. I mean, there are other categories of apps that we should cover in the future, but I think that that's a good place if people are interested in starting out with manual photography using a third-party camera app. We've got a couple great choices there and a couple good editing tools too. So those are definitely places to
Yep.
to check out in the upcoming weeks. So I want to thank our sponsors again for this show, Linode and Lunar Display, for making it possible. And as usual, you can find me and Federico over on MacStories.net. Federico is our editor-in-chief, and he's at Vitici on Twitter. That's VITICCI. And I'm at John Voorhees, JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.